The rain in Detroit didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker turn the potholes into shallow graves for what remained of this city's industrial pride. Marcus Chen sat at the chipped formica table of his basement apartment, staring at a piece of paper that was currently ruining his life. The eviction notice glowed pink under the single overhead bulb, bright as a child's birthday balloon. But the words printed in bold black ink carried no celebration. Final notice, 72 hours. The landlord's signature looked like a death warrant. Above him, footsteps thumped across the ceiling in a steady rhythm. Mrs. Kowalski, from 1A, pacing again, shaking dust into Marcus's lukewarm coffee. He watched the particles swirl and settle, little flecks of his neighbor's life contaminating what passed for his morning ritual. His hands rested flat on the table, palms down. They told the story better than any resume, thick, calloused, permanently stained with grease that no amount of scrubbing could lift. 3 months since the auto shop laid him off. 3 months of watching those stains fade without fresh oil to darken them. His bank balance sat at $42.18. He'd checked it 17 times today, as if repetition might conjure different numbers. The ceiling groaned. More dust. Marcus looked at the eviction notice again, then at the pill bottles lined up by the sink. Lily's asthma medication, the expensive kind that actually worked. Insurance had lapsed 6 weeks ago. He'd been rationing the doses, cutting each treatment in half, praying the mold creeping up the bathroom wall wouldn't trigger another attack before he found work. Marcus Chen was 42 years old, and he had failed his children in every measurable way. The bedroom door creaked. Marcus's hand shot out, covering the pink paper with his elbow. Too late. He turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, clutching that ragged stuffed bear that had lost its left eye sometime during Obama's first term. She wore the oversized T-shirt that served as her pajamas, bare feet on the cold linoleum. Her chest rose and fell with effort, each breath a small battle. His throat tightened. Every parent knows that sound, the wheeze that precedes the crisis. Lily's face had gone pale in the fluorescent light, lips taking on a bluish tint at the edges. Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his system with the familiar cocktail of fear and inadequacy. The nebulizer sat on the counter, its medication chamber nearly empty. He'd planned to make it last until Friday. It was only Tuesday. Lily took another step into the kitchen, the bear dangling from one hand. Her voice came out small and tight. "My chest hurts again." The air in the apartment went thin. Marcus pushed back from the table, chair legs scraping linoleum, and crossed to her in 3 strides. He scooped her up, ignoring the knife twist in his lower back that had become his constant companion since turning 40. Her weight felt wrong, too light, the kind of lightness that spoke of missed meals and growth spurts stunted by poverty. He settled into the chair, positioning her on his lap, one hand rubbing slow circles on her back. "Breathe with me," he wanted to say, but the words stuck. Instead, he drew air in slowly through his nose, counting to 4, holding it, releasing. The technique the ER doctor had shown him during Lily's last attack, back when they still had Medicaid. Lily's small body shuddered against his chest, fighting for oxygen. Her ribs felt like bird bones under his palm. Marcus looked around the room while his daughter struggled to breathe. A pile of laundry slouched in the corner, waiting for quarters he didn't have. Ryan's high school textbooks formed a crooked tower on an overturned milk crate held together by duct tape and desperation. Maya's sneakers sat by the door, the soles separating from the uppers held on with more tape. Oliver's drawings covered the refrigerator, crayon landscapes of places that didn't exist, escapes rendered in primary colors. 4 children, 4 heartbeats depending on him. And in 72 hours, the sheriff would stack their belongings on the curb for scavengers to pick through. This was it. This was all he could provide. A moldy basement and rationed medicine, and the slow suffocation of dreams deferred until they died quietly in the dark. Lily's breathing began to even out the crisis, passing on its own. Small mercy. Marcus held her until her body relaxed, until her eyes drifted shut. He carried her back to the bedroom she shared with Maya, navigating by memory through the darkness. 3 twin mattresses on the floor, arranged like puzzle pieces. Ryan got the couch. Oliver got the sleeping bag in the closet because at 10 he still thought camping indoors was an adventure. Marcus lowered Lily onto her mattress, tucked the threadbare blanket around her shoulders, and watched her chest rise and fall in the shallow rhythm of childhood sleep. When he returned to the kitchen, the eviction notice still glowed pink under the overhead light, mocking him, daring him to find a solution where none existed. The mailbox clanged shut the next morning with a sound like a prison door closing. Marcus trudged out in his slippers, expecting another bill or perhaps the final utility shut-off warning. November in Detroit meant the gas company didn't mess around. Instead, nestled between a credit card offer and a flyer for a payday loan operation, there sat an envelope that didn't belong in his world. Heavy, cream-colored paper, the kind that came with weight and consequence. The return address had been embossed in gold leaf, each letter raised and gleaming despite the overcast sky. Holden and Associates Attorneys at Law. An address in Portland, Maine. Marcus held it in both hands, feeling the texture. Real paper. The kind that cost money. His fingers trembled as he tore it open right there on the sidewalk, oblivious to the drizzle soaking through his t-shirt. The letter inside matched the envelope thick stock that crackled when he unfolded it. Formal language, legal terminology. But the core message punched through the jargon like a fist through drywall. Uncle Vincent was dead. Marcus Chen was listed as sole surviving kin. His presence was required for the reading of the estate distribution. Uncle Vincent. The name conjured memories Marcus hadn't accessed in 30 years, fragments of childhood summers before everything fell apart. Vincent Chen had been his father's younger brother, the eccentric one who'd vanished to the East Coast in the 80s. Family legend painted him as a cautionary tale, the gambler who'd lost everything on bad real estate deals, who'd died alone and broke and probably insane. Nobody talked about Vincent. Nobody visited. He'd become the ghost story parents told their children about the dangers of ambition. But Vincent had remembered Marcus, had put his name in a will, which meant there was something to inherit. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. Money. It had to be money. Maybe not a fortune, but enough to catch up on rent, enough to buy time, enough to keep the sheriff's truck from parking outside their building. The letter didn't specify amounts. It just requested his presence at the law office 2 days from now, 10 a.m. sharp. 2 days. The eviction was in 3. He ran back inside, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite his bad back. The basement apartment smelled like burnt toast and mildew. Ryan was up, hunched over a bowl of generic cereal, phone in hand, that permanent scowl of teenage cynicism etched across his face. At 17, Ryan had mastered the art of looking simultaneously bored and angry, a skill set perfectly calibrated for their current circumstances. Ryan glanced up as Marcus burst through the door, dripping rainwater onto the linoleum. His eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, which for Ryan constituted shocked surprise. Marcus held up the letter like a winning lottery ticket. His voice came out higher than intended, cracking on the edges. "Get your brother and sisters dressed, all of you. Best clothes." Ryan set down his spoon with deliberate slowness. "The sheriff coming early?" "No. We're going to a lawyer's office. Someone died. We might—" Marcus stopped himself, superstition and poverty combining to choke off the hope before he could speak it into existence. "We might be saved." The law office of Holden and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated brick building in Portland's Old Port District, the kind of neighborhood where tourists bought overpriced lobster rolls and locals resented the gentrification. Marcus and his 4 children looked painfully out of place in the reception area, their Detroit poverty clashing with the leather furniture and potted ferns. Ryan wore his least damaged hoodie, the fraying cuff tucked into his sleeve. Maya had done her best with a thrift store dress, ironing it in the motel bathroom that morning with a towel as a pressing cloth. Oliver fidgeted in the chair beside Marcus, swinging his legs. Sneakers that didn't quite fit, scuffing against expensive carpet. Lily sat on Marcus's lap, coughing quietly into his shoulder, the bear clutched tight. The receptionist looked at them with the kind of polite disdain reserved for people who couldn't afford her hourly rate. Before Marcus could announce himself, a door opened and a man emerged who seemed carved from ice and expensive suits. Reginald Holden, according to the nameplate on his desk. Mid-60s, silver hair, eyes like a shark evaluating prey. He gestured them into his office without bothering with pleasantries. The conference room smelled like old money and furniture polish. Sitting across from them was a woman Marcus vaguely recognized from Vincent's funeral photos, though he'd never actually met her. Christine and Gwen Vincent's stepdaughter from a brief failed marriage decades ago. She wore faux fur despite the heated office, checking her phone with the impatience of someone who had better places to be. She glanced at Marcus and his children, and something like satisfaction flickered across her face. Holden settled behind his mahogany desk, adjusting his reading glasses with theatrical precision. He opened a folder thick enough to be a mortgage document and cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the silence, formal and final. The will reading took on a rhythm, legal terminology rolling out in waves that Marcus struggled to parse. Holden's voice carried no inflection, treating fortunes and failures with equal indifference. Then came the relevant passage, the words that would reshape everything. To my stepdaughter Christine, who never visited but always called when rent was due. Holden paused, letting Vincent's posthumous judgment hang in the air. I leave the entirety of my liquid cash assets totaling $350,000. Christine let out a sharp squeal, the kind of sound that belonged at a game show, not a funeral proceeding. Her manicured hand flew to her mouth, but her eyes glittered with undisguised glee. Finally, she breathed the old bastard was good for something. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. 350,000. The number ricocheted around his skull, each impact more painful than the last. That money could have fixed everything. Everything. A house. Lily's medical care. Ryan's college tuition. Years of breathing room, of not waking up at 3 a.m. doing math about which bill to pay and which to ignore. Gone. Handed to a woman who'd just called Vincent a bastard while collecting his money. His fingers dug into the armrest of the chair until his knuckles blanched white. Beside him, Maya made a small, wounded sound. Ryan's jaw clenched, muscles working beneath his skin. Holden continued reading, his voice cutting through Marcus's shock. And finally, to my nephew Marcus, a man I haven't seen since he was a boy. I leave the remainder of my estate. The remainder. Marcus's heart stopped, restarted, hammered against his ribs. The remainder could be anything. Could be enough. Holden slid a thick file across the polished mahogany, the papers making a sound like bones settling. Specifically, the Seacliff Manor Hotel in Seaport Cove, Maine. Oliver's voice broke the silence, small and wondering. "We own a hotel." Christine laughed. The sound cut through the room like broken glass, cruel and sharp enough to draw blood. "Oh, you poor things." Her smile belonged on a predator. "You don't know, do you?" Marcus looked from Christine to the lawyer, dread settling into his stomach like concrete. "Know what?" Holden removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. The gesture suggested he'd rather be anywhere else dealing with any other family's dysfunction. "Mr. Chen, the Seacliff Manor is historic, which is a polite way of saying it's a ruin. The property has been shuttered for 15 years. It currently carries approximately $40,000 in back taxes and various liens. The city of Seaport Cove has designated it a blight structure. If the property is not brought up to code within 90 days, the state will seize it and demolish it at the owner's expense." The words landed like punches. Marcus tried to breathe, but the air had gone thick. He hadn't inherited a fortune. He'd inherited a catastrophe, a building that would bury him deeper than the Detroit basement ever could. His voice came out strangled, desperate. "I can't take it. I have $40 to my name. I can't pay those taxes." Holden's expression suggested he'd heard this particular plea before and found it tedious. Uncle Vincent was quite clear in his instructions. "There is a clause. You cannot sell the property for 1 year. You must live on the premises. If you refuse the inheritance, the property reverts to the state. However, and this is the unfortunate part, the debt has already been transferred to your name as the executor of the estate." Ryan shot to his feet. chair scraping against expensive carpet. "That's illegal." Holden's voice remained flat, bored by the outrage of people who couldn't afford to fight back. "It's a trust loophole. Your uncle was a very particular man. He wanted to see if you had grit, Mr. Chen. The keys are in the envelope." "Good day." Christine stood gathering her designer purse, still smiling that predator's smile. She paused beside Marcus on her way to the door, leaning close enough that he could smell her perfume. "Have fun with the rats, Marcus. That place is a dump." Vincent died of pneumonia in the lobby because the roof collapsed on him. Then she was gone, heels clicking down the hallway, leaving them in the wreckage of false hope. Marcus sat frozen. The eviction notice in Detroit was no longer his biggest problem. He now owned a nightmare in Maine, complete with debt he couldn't pay, and a 90-day deadline to achieve the impossible. Oliver tugged on his sleeve, voice still holding that child's wonder that hadn't yet learned to be cynical. "Dad, are we hotel owners now?" Marcus looked at his 4 children. Maya's eyes were wet, fighting tears. Ryan's fists were clenched, looking for something to hit. Oliver waited for an answer with that trusting expression that broke Marcus's heart. Lily coughed into her bear, oblivious to the disaster unfolding around them. They had nowhere else to go. The apartment in Detroit was already lost. "Yes, Noah." The lie tasted like ash. "We're going on an adventure." The drive to Maine took 20 hours in Marcus's beat-up 2008 minivan, the check engine light glowing like an accusation the entire way. They slept in parking lots at rest stops, the van's heater barely functional. November cold seeping through the windows. Dinner was peanut butter sandwiches assembled on the tailgate, tap water from bathroom sinks, drunk from disposable cups. Ryan navigated using his phone's dying battery and spotty data coverage. Maya kept Lily and Oliver entertained with stories, her voice steady even as her hands shook. Marcus drove his thoughts circling the same impossible equation. 90 days, $40,000. A hotel he'd never seen. The landscape changed as they crossed state lines. Connecticut's suburbs gave way to Massachusetts forests, then Maine's deeper wilderness. The highway narrowed, civilization thinning out, until the trees pressed close on both sides, thick with darkness even in daylight. The ocean smell found them before they saw water salt and seaweed and something older, something that spoke of depths and drowning. Seaport Cove announced itself with a sun-faded sign that promised historic downtown and fresh seafood. Neither claim looked particularly truthful. The town was the Maine they didn't put on postcards, a working-class harbor settlement where half the storefront stood empty behind plywood boards. The cannery had closed. The shipyard had closed. What remained looked like it was hanging on through stubbornness and spite. Men in work jackets stood outside the convenience store smoking, watching Marcus's Detroit plates roll past, with the flat assessment of people who'd seen their world die slowly and resented newcomers who might witness its final gasps. Maya's voice came from the back seat, reading from her cracked phone screen. "Turn left here. It says the hotel is at the top of the cliff." The minivan groaned as Marcus shifted down, grinding gears on the steep incline. Cliffside Drive lived up to its name, a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt that switchbacked up the rock face at angles that seemed designed to punish vehicles and test faith. Fog rolled in from the ocean, thick as smoke, reducing visibility to whatever the headlights could penetrate. The trees grew sparse, then disappeared entirely, leaving only scrub brush and exposed granite. Oliver pressed his face to the window, breath fogging the glass. "There," he said, pointing. Marcus hit the brakes. The hotel materialized out of the fog like something from a nightmare given architectural form. Seacliff Manor loomed at the edge of the precipice, a Victorian monument to ambition and decay. 4 stories of ornate woodwork and widows' walks, turrets, and wraparound porches, all of it rotting in slow motion. The structure had been painted white once, maybe decades ago. Now it wore its abandonment like a disease, the paint peeling off in great sheets that exposed blackened wood beneath. Windows gaped empty or boarded over with plywood that had itself begun to rot. The grand sign above the entrance hung by a single rusted chain, swinging in the wind with a squeal of tortured metal. The Seacliff Manor, the letters proclaimed, though half of them had fallen away to leave only fragmented promises. The building looked like it was actively dying, like they'd arrived just in time to watch it take its final breath. Lily's voice came out small and frightened. "It looks like a haunted house." Marcus swallowed hard, trying to force optimism into his voice and failing completely. "It has good bones." The words sounded hollow even to him. "Structure like this you could—" He stopped. There was no completing that sentence honestly. You could demolish it. You could run. You couldn't save it, not with $40 in 90 days. They parked on the gravel driveway, weeds growing waist-high through the stones. Marcus stepped out into the wind that came screaming off the Atlantic, cold enough to cut through his jacket. The silence was oppressive, broken only by waves crashing against rocks far below and that terrible squealing of the hanging sign. The edge of the cliff sat maybe 30 yards past the hotel, a sheer drop to jagged stones and churning water. One good storm, and the whole structure might slide into the ocean. Marcus popped the van's rear hatch. Their possessions amounted to 4 garbage bags of clothes, a box of kitchen supplies, and the children's school books. Everything they owned in the world condensed to what fit in a failing minivan. They began unloading in silence, the enormity of their situation crushing conversation. A sound broke through the wind and waves, engine noise growing louder. Marcus turned to see a black SUV with tinted windows rolling up the driveway, tires crunching gravel in a steady rhythm. The vehicle looked expensive in a way that made Marcus acutely aware of his own poverty, all clean lines and chrome accents. It moved with predatory patience, taking its time, savoring the approach. The SUV stopped 10 feet away. The engine cut off. The driver's door opened, and a man emerged who looked like he'd been designed to make Marcus feel inadequate. He wore a suit that cost more than 3 months of Marcus's old salary, charcoal gray, with subtle pinstripes tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a trim waist. His tan spoke of winter vacations in warm places. His teeth were too white, his smile too practiced, and his eyes pale gray cold, as the ocean below assessed Marcus and his children with the calculation of someone determining their net worth in seconds. He spread his arms in a gesture of false welcome, smile widening. "You must be the Chens. Welcome to the money pit." Marcus stepped in front of his children, instinctively positioning himself between them and this stranger who radiated threat disguised as charm. "Who are you?" The man extended a manicured hand, diamond cufflinks catching what little light penetrated the fog. "Dominic Ashford. I run Ashford Development. I own pretty much everything surrounding this pile of lumber." Marcus didn't take the offered hand. "What do you want?" Ashford retracted his hand smoothly, checking his Rolex with the kind of gesture meant to be noticed. "I'm a busy man, Marcus. Can I call you Marcus? I'm here to save your life." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I know about the back taxes. I know about the code violations. I know you have 90 days before the bulldozers come. You're standing on a sinking ship." He reached into his jacket. Marcus tensed, but Ashford only pulled out a checkbook, expensive leather, the kind with the carbon copies. He clicked a pen, gold-plated, and began writing. "I'm prepared to take this burden off your hands. I'll pay the back taxes. I'll handle the demolition costs. And I'll give you—" He tore out the check with a flourish, holding it up for Marcus to see, $20,000 cash. Today. The number hung in the air between them. 20,000. Not enough to solve everything, but enough to matter. Enough for first and last month's rent somewhere. Enough to buy time to regroup, to not sleep in the van while looking for work. Enough to keep Lily's medicine cabinet stocked through winter. Marcus stared at the check. His resolve wavered. This hotel was impossible. Everyone could see that. Taking the money was the smart play, the rational choice, the decision a responsible father would make. But Vincent's letter had been specific. Cannot sell for 1 year. Must live on premises. There was a reason for that clause. A reason Vincent had tied Marcus to this place. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "The will says I can't sell for a year." Ashford waved the objection away like swatting a fly. "Legal mumbo-jumbo. My lawyers can pierce that trust in a week. You sign a quitclaim deed, walk away, and this nightmare ends. Simple. Ryan stepped forward, jaw set, teenage anger sharpening his voice. "Why do you want it if it's trash?" Ashford's eyes snapped to the boy, his smile tightening at the edges. For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across his face, annoyance at being questioned by someone he considered irrelevant. "I don't want the hotel, kid. I want the land. I'm building a luxury golf course and spa resort. This eyesore is blocking my view of the 18th hole." Marcus looked at the hotel, really looked at it. Dominic Ashford drove a vehicle worth more than most people's annual salary. He wore wealth like armor. Men like that didn't personally visit broke families to offer charity. They sent lawyers or accountants or underlings. The fact that he'd come himself, that he'd written a check on the spot, that his eagerness leaked through his practiced calm, it meant something. Uncle Vincent had been many things, but he hadn't been stupid. The year-long restriction, the requirement to live here, the cryptic nature of the inheritance, it was a puzzle, a test. And Dominic Ashford's presence suggested there was something worth finding. Marcus folded the eviction notice he'd been carrying in his pocket since Detroit. "We just got here. We need a place to sleep." Ashford's smile froze, becoming something harder. "Sleep inside there." His gesture toward the hotel was dismissive, contemptuous. "You're braver than I thought. Or more desperate. The offer stands for 24 hours. After that, he slid back into the SUV, the leather seat sighing under his weight. "I make some calls. Health inspector, fire marshal, child protective services. Once they see the black mold, the structural damage, the unsafe conditions." He started the engine, looking at Marcus through the lowered window. "They'll condemn it faster than you can pack. Then you get nothing. Don't be a hero, Marcus. Poor men can't afford to be heroes." The SUV pulled away, leaving exhaust and implied threats hanging in the damp air. Marcus stood watching until the taillights disappeared down the switchback road. His hands were shaking. He looked down at them, at the fading grease stains, at the calluses from work he no longer had, and realized they'd curled into fists. Ryan moved to stand beside him, voice low. "He's right, you know, about the hotel." "I know. So why didn't you take the money?" Marcus didn't have a good answer. Just a feeling, the kind of instinct that had served him well as a mechanic when diagnosing engine problems. Something about Ashford's desperation, about the too generous offer, about the way he'd dismissed the building while clearly wanting the land beneath it. Vincent had protected this place for a reason. Had died here rather than sell it. Marcus turned to face the hotel. The front door stood beneath a sagging portico, heavy wood, dark with age and weather damage. The iron key Holden had given him felt cold in his palm, the metal corroded but still solid. He approached the entrance, children trailing behind, and fitted the key into the lock. It ground against rust and accumulated grime, protesting decades of disuse. Then something gave way with a click that echoed in the silence. Marcus pushed. The door swung inward with a groan of tortured hinges, revealing darkness that seemed to have weight and texture. The smell hit them first. Mold, thick and pervasive. Damp wood rotting in slow motion. Something metallic underneath, like old pipes or dried blood. The children coughed, covering their noses. Marcus's eyes watered, but he forced himself forward, fumbling for a light switch he couldn't find. Oliver's voice came out of the darkness, echoing strangely, "Dad, look at the floor." Marcus's eyes adjusted to the gloom filtering through broken windows. The lobby sprawled before them, cavernous. A chandelier lay shattered on the floor, crystal prisms scattered like broken promises. The front desk hunched against the far wall, draped in cobwebs. A grand staircase curved upward several steps, missing the banister hanging at drunken angles. And in the center of the marble floor, someone had spray-painted a message in letters 3 feet high, the red paint fresh enough to still smell chemical and angry, "Get out." The words seemed to pulse in the half-light, a warning or a threat or both. Lily pressed against Marcus's leg, whimpering. Maya's breath came quick and shallow. Even Ryan had gone quiet, teenage bravado failing in the face of this violation. Marcus heard his own voice trying for reassurance and landing somewhere near desperation. "Just local kids, vandalism, we can scrub it off." But none of them believed it. The message felt too pointed, too deliberate. Someone knew they were coming. Someone wanted them gone. The cold in the lobby had nothing to do with November. It lived in the walls, ancient and patient. Lily's voice cut through the silence. "It's freezing." Marcus made a decision, the kind made from necessity rather than wisdom. "Jack, help me find the breaker box. Emily, keep Sophie and Oliver near the door. Don't touch anything." He and Ryan moved deeper into the hotel, the darkness seeming to close behind them like water. They navigated by phone flashlight, the beams cutting weak paths through decades of dust. The lobby opened onto a hallway lined with doors, most hanging open or missing entirely. Kitchen, dining room, ballroom, each space more ruined than the last. Behind what had once been the kitchen, they found a utility room, the door marked with fading paint. Marcus expected nothing, hoped for nothing. When Ryan found the main breaker and threw it with both hands, the last thing Marcus anticipated was success. But the building responded. A deep hum vibrated through the walls, ancient electrical systems waking from their long sleep. Above them something clicked and buzzed. Then, impossibly light. A single bulb flickered to life behind the reception desk, weak and yellow, but light nonetheless. Power. The hotel still had power. Ryan stared at his father's face, half lit by the glow from the lobby. How is that possible?" Marcus had no answer. Vincent had been dead 3 days. The hotel had been abandoned for 15 years. Someone had to be paying the electrical bill. Someone was maintaining just enough to keep the building technically alive. They returned to the lobby where Maya clutched Oliver and Lily close, all three watching that spray-painted warning like it might attack. The single light bulb revealed more details now. Water damage staining the walls in abstract patterns. Sections of ceiling sagging dangerously. Trash and leaves blown into corners, but also solid bones. The structure underneath the decay looked sound, the kind of craftsmanship from an era when buildings were meant to last centuries. Marcus approached the reception desk, drawn by something he couldn't name. Behind it, the wall was covered with cubbyholes, hundreds of them, each labeled with a room number. Most stood empty. But in slot 44, right at eye level, something waited. A leather-bound book small enough to fit in his palm. Marcus pulled it free, dust raining down. The cover was embossed with initials V.C. Vincent Chen, a diary. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened it to the last entry dated 3 days before Vincent's death. The handwriting was shaky, frantic words running together in places where the pen had pressed too hard. "They are watching me." Lockwood circles like a vulture. Dominic Marcus realized the name scratched out and replaced. "He thinks it's about the view. He doesn't know what's underneath." "I hid the map. I hid the key." "Marcus, if you're writing this, don't sign. Whatever you do, don't sign. The water is the gold. The water is the life." Ryan read over Marcus's shoulder, voice dropping to a whisper. "Dad, what does it mean? The water is the gold." Marcus closed the book, looking around the ruined lobby. At the spray-painted warning. At the threatening graffiti. At his children standing in the cold, homeless and hungry, and depending on him to somehow make this work. He thought about Dominic Ashford's $20,000 check. About the eagerness in the man's eyes. About the way he'd dismissed the building while clearly needing the land. Vincent hadn't left him a hotel. He'd left him a mystery. A puzzle that someone was willing to pay or threaten to prevent him from solving. Marcus looked at his 4 children, at their frightened faces, at the impossible situation he'd dragged them into. The smart play was to take Ashford's money and run. The safe play. The play a good father would make. But Marcus Chen had been running his whole life. Running from debt, from failure. From the hard choices that separated those who survived from those who merely endured. And where had it gotten him? A basement apartment and an eviction notice, and children who'd learned to expect disappointment. His voice came out stronger than he felt, carrying enough conviction that he almost believed it himself. "It means we aren't going anywhere." The first night in Seacliff Manor was an education in fear. Wind screamed off the Atlantic like something alive and vengeful, finding every crack in the Victorian siding, whistling through gaps that turned the building into a massive instrument playing notes of abandonment. Marcus had corralled the children into the industrial kitchen on the ground floor, the only room with a door that still latched, and crucially, a cast-iron stove massive enough to serve a hotel's dining room in better days. The beast radiated residual warmth from decades of use, some phantom heat that defied thermodynamics. They slept on curtains torn from the ballroom heavy velvet fabric that smelled of mildew and forgotten celebrations. Lily's cough echoed off the tile walls, a wet rattling that made Marcus's chest constrict with helplessness. He sat awake with a tire iron across his knees, watching shadows dance in the weak moonlight filtering through grimy windows. Every creak of settling timber sounded like footsteps. Every branch scraping glass became an intruder testing entry points. Around 3 in the morning, a sound cut through the ambient noise that was different wrong. Metal on metal, a clang that reverberated up through the floorboards. It came from below them, from depths Marcus hadn't yet explored. Ryan jerked upright from his makeshift bed, eyes wide in the darkness. His whisper carried across the kitchen. "What was that?" Marcus was already standing, gripping the tire iron until his knuckles ached. He moved to the kitchen door, unlocked it as quietly as possible. "Stay here. Lock this behind me. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, take everyone to the van." Ryan scrambled up, grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter. The blade was dull, but it was something. His face had gone pale, teenage bravado stripped away to reveal the scared kid underneath. "Dad, don't—" Marcus cut him off with a look. "If it's a pipe, we lose our water. If it's something else, I need to know." He slipped into the hallway, heard the kitchen door lock click behind him. His phone's flashlight carved a weak tunnel through accumulated darkness, dust motes swirling in the beam like snow. The hallway extended past what had once been servants' quarters, doors hanging open on broken hinges. At the end stood a heavy oak door labeled mechanical in faded paint. Marcus approached it slowly, every horror movie he'd ever seen playing in the back of his mind. The door stood slightly ajar. He was certain he'd checked every ground floor lock before settling the children for the night. Certain he'd secured this one. His boot connected with the door, sending it crashing inward. The flashlight beam swept the room in frantic arcs. "Who's there?" The mechanical room was vast, housing a boiler that belonged in a museum. The thing squatted in the center of the space like some industrial god pipes, radiating outward in a complexity that made Marcus's auto mechanic training feel inadequate. Cold air moved through the room, carrying the smell of rust and stagnant water. Drip, drip, drip. Condensation falling from overhead pipes into puddles that had been there so long they'd developed ecosystems. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision. Behind a stack of rotting pallets against the far wall, a shape detached itself from the shadows. Human. Dressed in black from head to toe, face obscured by a ski mask. The figure moved with purpose, scrambling toward a maintenance ladder bolted to the wall that led up to a high window. Marcus lunged forward, dropping the flashlight. It spun on the concrete floor, the beam wheeling crazily. His hand closed around the intruder's boot heel just as they reached the ladder's third rung. The figure kicked back hard, the heel catching Marcus in the shoulder with force that sent pain radiating down his arm. He stumbled, lost his grip, and the intruder was moving again. They scaled the ladder with practiced efficiency, reached the window, and smashed through the glass with an elbow. Cold night air rushed in. By the time Marcus reached the ladder's base, the figure had vanished into the fog. Marcus stood breathing hard, shoulder throbbing. He retrieved his phone, the screen cracked from the drop, but still functional. The beam illuminated what the intruder had been doing. The pallets had been moved aside, revealing a section of concrete floor that someone had attacked with a chisel or pry bar. Fresh concrete dust littered the ground. They'd been digging, searching. Marcus knelt, brushing away debris. Beneath the violated concrete, something gleamed. Not dirt, not building foundation. Metal. He cleared more dust, revealing a circular hatch about 3 feet in diameter. It looked like something from a submarine, a wheel mechanism in the center surrounded by rivets gone orange with age. Etched into the brass wheel in letters that had survived decades, Aquaviti, 1922. The words from Vincent's diary echoed in Marcus's memory. "The water is the gold. The water is the life. He tried to turn the wheel. It refused to budge, welded in place by rust and time. Marcus hit it with the tire iron, putting his weight behind the blow. The impact sent reverberations up his arms, but the hatch remained sealed. Footsteps behind him. Marcus spun, tire iron raised, to find Ryan in the doorway. The teenager held the kitchen knife in a white-knuckled grip, trying to look brave and failing completely. "You okay?" Marcus lowered the weapon. "We're not alone. Dominic's people are already inside. They're looking for this." He gestured to the hatch. Ryan approached, crouched beside his father. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "What is it?" "I don't know." Marcus traced the etched letters with one finger. "But whatever's down there, Uncle Vincent died protecting it, and Dominic Ashford is willing to break in to find it." They stood there in the mechanical room, father and son, staring at a mystery sealed beneath their feet. Above them, through the broken window, the sky was beginning to lighten with the threat of dawn. The next morning arrived with the subtlety of an execution. At 8 a.m. sharp, a white city van pulled into the gravel driveway. Marcus watched from the kitchen window as a short, balding man emerged, clutching a clipboard like a shield. A uniformed police officer followed, moving with the resigned weariness of someone who'd made this trip before and knew how it ended. Marcus met them on the porch. The morning was bitter, his breath visible, the ocean wind cutting through his jacket. "Can I help you?" The balding man consulted his clipboard with theatrical attention to detail. "Mr. Chen, I'm Inspector Graves, Port Haven Code Enforcement. We received an anonymous tip regarding unsafe living conditions involving minor children." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "We just arrived 2 days ago." Graves looked up, his expression professionally neutral. "That's not really relevant, Mr. Chen. If the roof leaks, if there's mold, if the heating system doesn't function, I have the authority to condemn this property immediately and place your children in protective custody pending a safety investigation." The officer shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. His name tag read Coleman. Sheriff Coleman, Marcus would learn later, a weak man caught between duty and the corruption that had infected Seaport Cove like rot in timber. Marcus stepped back, gesturing to the hotel. "Feel free to look around. We're working on repairs." Graves spent an hour systematically documenting every failure: broken windows, lack of central heating, questionable electrical wiring that sparked when tested, black mold colonizing the bathroom walls, structural concerns with the main staircase where several treads had rotted through, water damage staining entire rooms, fire hazards from exposed wiring, and the ancient stove in the kitchen. His pen never stopped moving, each notation another nail in Marcus's coffin. When Graves finally emerged from his inspection, he stood in the lobby and made his pronouncement with the flat affect of a judge reading a death sentence. "This is a death trap, Mr. Chen. I'm issuing an immediate condemnation notice." Marcus felt the world tilt. "Please, give me a chance. I can fix this." Graves looked at Sheriff Coleman, then back at Marcus. Something in his expression suggested conflict, a man following orders he didn't entirely believe in. The city statute allows for a grace period, but only if the primary hazard is neutralized. Your boiler, it's illegal to operate. You have no heat source. If you can get that system running and pass a carbon monoxide inspection within 48 hours, I might allow you to remain during the remediation period. His eyes held Marcus's, and for a moment genuine pity flickered there. "But if you fail, the children go to foster care, and you go to the street. Those are the regulations, Mr. Chen. I don't write them." Graves handed over a citation, the paper official and damning. 48 hours, Mr. Chen." As the white van pulled away, Marcus saw the black SUV parked down the road, just visible through the morning fog. Dominic Ashford sat behind the wheel watching. He raised one hand in a mock salute, then drove off. The message was clear. Every move Marcus made was being monitored, every stumble documented, every failure weaponized. Marcus stood alone on the porch looking at the citation. 48 hours to revive a boiler that hadn't functioned in 20 years. With no money, no tools, no expertise in industrial heating systems. The impossibility of it pressed down on him like the weight of the hotel itself. That night, Marcus sat alone in the kitchen long after the children had fallen asleep. On the table before him sat something he hadn't told them about: a check. Dominic Ashford had left it tucked under the van's windshield wiper sometime during the inspection, a small white rectangle that represented everything Marcus needed and everything he feared. $20,000. As advance payment, the attached note explained, showing good faith. The offer remains open. Marcus stared at those numbers until they blurred. $20,000 could buy them an apartment, first and last month's rent, with enough left over for deposits on utilities. It could get them through winter while he found work. Could keep Lily's medicine cabinet stocked. Could give Ryan a chance at community college. Could let Maya and Oliver have something resembling normal childhoods. The check sat there, glowing in the overhead light, a solution wrapped in surrender. His mind circled through justifications. What did he really owe Vincent? An uncle he hadn't seen in 30 years. A man the family had written off as crazy, who'd left him not a gift, but a burden designed to break him. What was he trying to prove? That poverty had nobility, that struggle built character. His children weren't learning resilience in this freezing ruin. They were learning that their father made bad decisions. Marcus picked up the check, feeling its weight. Paper shouldn't feel heavy, but this did. It felt like the gravitational pull of practicality, of pragmatism, of a choice that anyone with sense would make. But Vincent's words haunted him. Don't sign. Whatever you do, don't sign. The water is the gold. What if he was wrong? What if there was nothing under the hotel but Vincent's delusions, and Marcus was sacrificing his children's welfare to chase a dead man's fantasies? What if the smart choice, the responsible choice, the choice a good father would make, was to take the money and walk away? His hands shook. He thought about Ryan's college prospects evaporating, about Maya's worn-out shoes with the soles separating, about Oliver sleeping in closets because there weren't enough rooms, about Lily's labored breathing in the moldy apartment, the way her lips turned blue when the asthma hit hard. He had failed them in Detroit. He was failing them here. When did persistence become abuse? When did determination become delusion? But beneath the fear and doubt, something else stirred. Marcus had spent his entire adult life running from debt collectors and disappointed expectations, and the hard truth that he'd never amount to what his parents had hoped. Every time things got difficult, he'd moved. New city, new job, new promises that somehow never materialized into stability. And where had it gotten him? To a basement apartment with an eviction notice to children who'd learned not to hope, because hope only led to disappointment. Maybe Vincent hadn't left him a hotel. Maybe he'd left him a mirror, a chance to see what Marcus was made of when running wasn't an option. Maybe the inheritance wasn't the building or whatever lay beneath it. Maybe it was the opportunity to finally stand and fight. Marcus looked at the check one last time. Then he tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper seemed impossibly loud in the silent kitchen. He tore it again and again, until Dominic Ashford's solution lay in pieces on the Formica table like snow that would never melt. He had 46 hours to fix the boiler. He had $40 to his name. He had 4 children depending on him. He had no idea what he was doing, but he was done running. The next morning, Marcus loaded Ryan into the van and headed into Seaport Cove proper. The town looked even grimmer in daylight, the boarded storefronts more numerous than he'd initially realized. A cannery stood empty on the waterfront, broken windows staring out at the harbor like dead eyes. The shipyard had rusted into abstract sculpture. What businesses remained catered to the fishing fleet and the old-timers who'd been born here and would die here, stubborn as barnacles. Rosa's Hardware occupied a narrow storefront between a closed diner and a pawn shop. The bell above the door announced their entry with a cheerful ding that felt incongruous with the town's general depression. Inside smelled of sawdust and motor oil, familiar scents that made Marcus's chest ache for the auto shop job he'd lost. A woman looked up from behind the counter, maybe 65, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades dealing with Maine winters and difficult customers in that order. Her eyes assessed Marcus and Ryan with the speed of someone who'd learned to judge financial status at a glance. "You're the one who moved into the spook house." It wasn't a question. Marcus approached the counter, choosing honesty over pride. News travels fast. Rosa, her name tag was handwritten, the letters precise, set down her newspaper. It does. Small town, Mr. Chen. And you're fighting Dominic Ashford, which makes you the most interesting thing to happen here since the cannery fire of '98 killed 2 men and put 200 out of work. Marcus put his hands on the counter, the wood smooth from years of transactions. "I need parts. Valves, gaskets, pipe sealant. I don't have money. But I can work. I can sweep. Stock shelves. Fix your roof if it needs it. I was an auto mechanic for 15 years before Ashford bought the bank that holds the notes on half the businesses in this town." Rosa finished his sentence. "Before he jacked up commercial rents by 40% and forced anyone who couldn't pay to sell at pennies on the dollar. Before he bought the mayor and the city council and convinced them that luxury condos and golf courses were the future while the rest of us drowned." She reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy cardboard box. Inside, Marcus glimpsed tools, wrenches, pipe fittings, sealant tubes, replacement gaskets, everything he'd been about to beg for. Rosa added a canvas bag filled with more supplies, then a third box of miscellaneous hardware. "Pay me when you beat him." Marcus stared at the supplies, then at this woman who'd just handed a stranger hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise on nothing but hope. His voice came out thick. "I don't even know if I can fix that boiler. You'll need more than a wrench and good intentions." Rosa pulled a small notepad from her apron and wrote an address. "Go to Seaside Pines Nursing Home on Elm Street, room 3B. Ask for Edgar Bennett. Tell him Vincent sent you. If anyone can get that Widowmaker running, it's Edgar. He and your uncle worked on that system back when Seacliff was still operational." Ryan helped carry the boxes to the van, moving with an efficiency that made Marcus's throat tight. His son asked the question Marcus had been avoiding: "Why are people helping us? They don't know us." Marcus watched Rosa through the hardware store window as she returned to her newspaper. "Because Dominic Ashford has been squeezing this town dry for a decade, and they're tired of watching him win. We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore, Ryan. We're fighting for everyone he's already beaten." Seaside Pines Nursing Home smelled like institutional food and quiet surrender. The receptionist directed them to the third-floor east wing without much interest. Room 3B sat at the end of a hallway decorated with cheerful paintings that couldn't quite mask the underlying atmosphere of waiting for death. Edgar Bennett sat in a wheelchair positioned by the window, staring out at the Atlantic. At 88, he'd been reduced to bird bones and parchment skin, but his eyes remained sharp and blue as winter ice. He turned his head as Marcus knocked on the open door frame, and something like recognition flickered across his weathered face. "Vincent's dead, then?" It wasn't a question that needed confirmation. Edgar wheeled himself away from the window, gesturing to the chairs beside his bed. Marcus and Ryan sat. The old man studied them with an intensity that suggested he was reading more than their faces, cataloging the desperation in their postures and the fear they tried to hide. Marcus explained their situation in economical sentences: the inheritance, the debt, the 90-day deadline, the boiler that needed to function in 45 hours, or they'd lose everything, including the children. Edgar listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, the old man produced a sound somewhere between a chuckle and a death rattle. "Vincent was a stubborn old goat, but he was my best friend. We worked on the Seacliff together back in the 70s before he shut it down and locked himself in like a hermit guarding treasure." "Why did he shut it down?" Marcus leaned forward, voice urgent. "Why is everyone so desperate for that property?" Edgar wheeled himself to a small desk, pulled out a drawer, and extracted a faded photograph. The image showed a younger Vincent and a younger Edgar standing in front of Seacliff Manor when it still gleamed white and proud. Between them stood a massive industrial pump, the kind used for deep wells. "You think the Seacliff's a hotel, son?" Edgar's voice carried the weight of revealed secrets. The Seacliff was built in 1920 by a bootlegger named Cornelius Vance. Vance didn't care about guests. He cared about what was underneath. The hatch. Marcus's pulse quickened. Aquaviti. Edgar nodded slowly. Vance found a geological anomaly, a thermal aquifer running beneath the property. Not just hot water. Highly mineralized. Magnesium, lithium, sulfur. Trace elements that occurred nowhere else on the East Coast in that combination. Vance bottled it, sold it as a miracle cure during Prohibition to launder his rum money, made a fortune until the state shut him down and capped the well in '33. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. Dominic knows. He doesn't want a golf course. He wants the water rights. The old man's eyes glittered. Bottled luxury water is a billion-dollar industry now. Wellness brands charging $6 for 16 ounces of what they claim is pure mountain spring water, blessed by monks or filtered through volcanic rock or whatever marketing lie sells. If that aquifer is still active, if the water's as unique as Vance claimed, the rights alone are worth $200 million. Conservatively, the number hung in the air like a physical presence. $200 million. Beneath the rotting hotel. Beneath the impossible debt. Beneath everything Marcus thought he understood about his inheritance. But here's the catch, son. Edgar leaned forward, intensity cutting through his frailty. To claim those water rights, you need to prove the source is active. You need the building standing. The Seacliff's water rights are grandfathered under original mineral extraction laws from the '20s. If the building's demolished, those rights revert to the state. And Dominic Ashford owns enough of the state government to buy them for pennies once they're public. The boiler. Marcus's mind raced. It doesn't just heat the building, it powers the well pump. Edgar pulled a napkin from the bedside table and drew with a trembling hand. The diagram was complex valves and pressure regulators and steam lines that fed into a turbine system. The boiler generates steam. Steam drives the turbine. Turbine powers the mechanical pump for the well. You fix the boiler, you unlock the water. You prove the aquifer exists, you've got leverage. You've got everything Dominic wants and can't take. His pen circled a specific valve on the diagram. Bypass valve behind the main intake. It's probably rusted shut. You need to heat it with a torch and strike it with a sledgehammer at exactly 50 psi. Miss the timing, the whole system blows and takes you with it. Hit it right, the steam clears the lines and everything comes back to life. Edgar handed Marcus the napkin, the paper soft and fragile as hope. Give them hell, Marcus Chen. Vincent believed you had what it took. Prove him right. They worked through the night, Marcus and Ryan, and eventually all the children, as the impossibility of the task became clear. The basement was a meat locker, their breath coming in clouds that dispersed under the single work light Ryan had rigged. Lily sat on an upturned crate wrapped in 3 blankets, reading aloud from Vincent's diary to keep them awake. Maya had found old technical manuals in the office and cross-referenced Edgar's diagram against the boiler's actual configuration, catching discrepancies that would have led to disaster. Oliver organized tools, fetched supplies, and held flashlights without complaint. The boiler was a nightmare of complexity. 20 years of neglect had fused parts that should move and corroded seals that should hold. Marcus's auto-mechanic skills translated partially pressure systems were pressure systems, but the scale was overwhelming. Each component they cleaned or replaced revealed 3 more problems. A stripped bolt that had to be drilled out. A cracked fitting that needed epoxy reinforcement. The pilot light orifice clogged with mineral deposits that required an hour of meticulous cleaning. Ryan's fingers had gone numb hours ago, but he kept working. Maya's research proved invaluable, catching a pressure gauge that had drifted out of calibration. If they'd relied on its readings, the whole system would have exploded. Oliver's young eyes spotted a hairline crack in a crucial steam line that Marcus had missed. Even Lily contributed her small voice, reading Vincent's increasingly frantic diary entries that mentioned the boiler's quirks and temperament. Around 4 a.m. they were ready. Marcus lit the pilot light with hands that shook from exhaustion and fear. The gas caught with a whoosh that made everyone flinch. The beast began to rumble, a sound like waking something ancient and angry from its sleep. Pressure building. Marcus called out the readings from the newly calibrated gauge. 10 psi. 20. The pipes groaned throughout the building, decades of stagnant water beginning to move. Dust shook from the ceiling. The safety systems they'd bypassed earlier screamed warnings that Marcus ignored. 30 psi. A steam leak erupted from a joint Marcus thought he'd sealed. Ryan lunged for it with a wrench tightening while hot vapor scalded his hands. He didn't cry out, just gritted his teeth and kept turning until the leak became a hiss, then a whisper, then nothing. 40 psi. 45. The boiler's casing began to shudder violently. It sounded like a jet engine trying to tear free from its moorings. The noise was physical, pressing against Marcus's chest. Ryan stood ready with the sledgehammer, the tool looking too big for his teenage frame. His voice cracked, "Dad, it's going to blow." Marcus watched the needle climb toward the red zone. Wait, 50 psi. The safety whistle cut through the noise, an ear-splitting shriek. Now Ryan swung with everything he had. The hammer connected with the bypass valve. The impact rang through the basement. Nothing happened. The pressure climbed to 55. The whistle became a scream. Maya grabbed Oliver and Lily, pulling them toward the stairs, preparing to run. Again, Marcus's voice barely cut through the chaos. Ryan swung a second time, putting his whole body into it, 17 years of frustration and fear channeled into one desperate strike. The sledgehammer connected. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then the valve turned with a groan of tortured metal that sounded like the building itself screaming. A massive thump echoed up through the floorboards, followed by the rush of water and hissing steam flooding through lines that hadn't carried anything but rust in 2 decades. The safety whistle died as pressure stabilized. Heat, glorious, radiating, impossible heat, began pulsing from the iron beast. Marcus slumped against the wall, laughing with an edge of hysteria. Ryan dropped the sledgehammer, grinning despite hands that would blister by morning. Maya hugged Oliver and Lily, all 3 of them shaking with relief. They'd done it. Against every reasonable expectation, against the laws of probability and the wisdom of giving up, they had brought the dead system back to life. The celebration lasted exactly as long as it took to hear the heavy oak door at the top of the basement stairs slam shut. The lock clicked with terrible finality. Marcus ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. He pounded on the door with both fists. "Hey, who's there?" Smoke began seeping through the gap beneath the door. Not steam from the boiler. Smoke. Black and chemical and wrong. The smell hit them gasoline. Lily's voice small and terrified. "It smells like gas." Marcus's mind caught up with the situation in a rush of ice-cold understanding. Dominic hadn't waited for the inspection. He'd sent someone to ensure they never passed it. The hotel was burning with them trapped in the basement. The hatch. Marcus spun, pointing at the mechanical room. "Ryan, get the pry bar. We have to open it." Ryan's face went white. "Why?" "Because we can't go up." Marcus gestured at the smoke now billowing under the door, thickening by the second. The fire was already roaring in the hallway above, consuming the old wood like kindling. "We have to go down." They ran to the mechanical room, Marcus and Ryan, grabbing the tire iron and pry bar, jamming both into the wheel mechanism of the Aquaviti hatch. The heat in the basement was rising, the fire eating through the door above. Maya joined them, adding her weight. Oliver held Lily, both children coughing as smoke found its way into the mechanical room. 1, 2, 3, push! They strained, veins standing out on Marcus's neck, Ryan's face going purple with effort. The wheel refused to move. Above them, timber cracked and fell. The sound of destruction was getting closer. Again, Marcus shouted over the noise. On 3, they pushed with everything they had, exhaustion and fear and desperation converting into raw force. The wheel groaned, rust flaked off in chunks. Then with a screech that hurt their ears, it turned. The hatch popped open with a hiss of pressurized air that had been sealed for decades. Below them yawned darkness absolute. A rusty ladder descended into nothing. The sound of rushing water echoed up from depths they couldn't see. Lily first. Marcus lifted his coughing daughter, lowering her onto the ladder. Oliver followed, moving slower but steady. Maya went next, her voice drifting up. "I can't see the bottom. Keep climbing down." Marcus's voice was hoarse from smoke. The basement door collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks and burning timber. Fire rushed toward them like a living thing. "Ryan, go." Ryan descended. Marcus grabbed Vincent's diary from where Lily had left it on the crate, stuffed Edgar's napkin diagram in his pocket, and swung onto the ladder. He pulled the heavy hatch shut above him just as flames reached the mechanical room. The seal cut off the fire's oxygen, plunging them into absolute darkness, broken only by phone flashlights far below. They were alive, but they were trapped 50 feet underground with the world burning above them and no idea what waited in the darkness below. The ladder rungs were slick with condensation, treacherous. Marcus counted as he descended the numbers, a mantra against panic. 50, 60, 70. His shoulders brushed stone walls, the space narrowing until he had to angle sideways to fit. The air grew heavy with humidity, smelling of sulfur and wet limestone, and something older, something that spoke of depths the ocean had carved long before humans thought to build hotels above them. Ryan's voice drifted up from below. "Dad, I hit bottom. There's water." Marcus's boots splashed into shallow water moments later. He swept his phone's flashlight around the beam, cutting through darkness that had weight and presence. They stood in a natural cavern, the ceiling dripping with stalactites that looked like teeth. But this wasn't just a cave. It was a factory. Rusted conveyor belts snaked through the space like industrial intestines. Wooden crates stamped Vance Import/Export in faded letters leaned against the walls in stacks. Glass bottles, hundreds of them, stood in neat rows on shelves carved into the stone. Equipment from the 20s, pumps and filters and bottling machinery, sat frozen mid-process, waiting for workers who would never return. And in the center of the cavern, the thing that made Cornelius Vance rich and drove Dominic Ashford to arson a pool of water so clear it looked like liquid glass. The surface bubbled gently from a fissure in the bedrock, natural carbonation, creating ripples that caught the phone light and scattered it in patterns across the cave walls. Steam rose in lazy spirals, carrying minerals that made the air taste sharp and clean, despite the sulfur smell. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "It's beautiful." Marcus knelt beside the pool, dipped his hand in. The water was warm, almost hot. He brought his palm to his lips, tasted it. Distinct flavor, nothing like tap water or bottled spring water from the supermarket. Mineral-heavy, slightly sweet with a fizzy quality that danced on his tongue. It tasted expensive. It tasted like Vincent's last words made manifest. It tasted like $200 million in salvation and the reason Dominic Ashford wanted them dead. "We have to find a way out." Maya's practical voice cut through the wonder. "The smoke. We need air." Marcus stood playing his light across the cavern until he caught movement. Not an intruder this time. Air. Fresh air moving through the stagnant depths, coming from somewhere the ocean touched stone. There. He pointed to where the cavern narrowed into a tunnel. Old minecart tracks disappearing into darkness. "That's our exit." They scrambled over rocky floor, following the tracks. The tunnel sloped upward, water trickling along channels worn into the stone. The sound of waves grew louder with each step, the ocean calling them toward freedom. The passage widened, the ceiling rising until Marcus could stand fully upright. Ahead, a jagged slit of gray light cut through the darkness. They squeezed through the opening one by one, tumbling onto wet sand. Dawn was breaking over the Atlantic, pale light painting the world in shades of gray and silver. They'd emerged into a small cove at the base of the cliff, hidden from the road above by the angle of the rock face in the morning fog. The tide was out, exposing the secret entrance that high water would conceal. Marcus looked up. Far above, at the edge of the precipice, Seacliff Manor stood silhouetted against the lightening sky, and it was smoking. Thick black smoke poured from the ground floor windows, carried by the wind in streamers that looked like the building was bleeding darkness. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone had seen the fire. Someone had called it in. Marcus's mind raced through scenarios, calculating what this meant. What story would be believed? What evidence might remain in the ashes? They had survived. They had found the aquifer. They had proof that Vincent wasn't crazy, that the inheritance was real, that everything Dominic Ashford wanted existed beneath the hotel he'd just tried to burn down with Marcus's family inside. But now came the hard part. Now they had to prove it. Marcus gathered his children close, all four of them shivering in the cold Atlantic morning, and began the climb up the hidden goat path that would take them back to the top of the cliff. Back to the hotel, back to the fight that was only beginning. The climb up the goat path took 20 agonizing minutes, the children slipping on wet stone, Marcus's lungs burning from smoke inhalation and exertion. When they finally crested the ridge and stumbled onto the gravel driveway, 2 fire trucks had already deployed their crews, spraying water through the kitchen windows in coordinated streams. A crowd had gathered, townspeople Marcus didn't recognize, attracted by disaster the way moths found flame. Sheriff Coleman stood near one of the trucks talking to a reporter from what looked like the local paper, a young woman with a notebook who wrote furiously while he spoke. And there, leaning against his black SUV with an expression of practiced concern, stood Dominic Ashford. Marcus heard fragments of the conversation as he approached, covered in soot and cave slime, his children trailing behind like survivors of a shipwreck. Dominic's voice carried the perfect note of regret. "A tragedy, really. I warned them about the electrical system. Tried to purchase the property just to prevent exactly this kind of disaster. Those poor people." The word cut through the morning like a blade. Marcus's shout made heads turn, conversations die mid-sentence. Dominic spun around, and for one beautiful moment Marcus watched all color drain from the developer's face. The transformation was instant, practiced sympathy replaced by genuine shock, then fear, then a desperate scramble to recalibrate. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, a specter risen from what should have been his grave. He pointed one soot-blackened finger at Dominic. "We're not dead yet." His voice came out hoarse from smoke but steady with rage. "And we're not going anywhere." Sheriff Coleman pushed through the crowd, his jaw working soundlessly. "Marcus, we thought the doors were locked from the inside." The fire marshal said, "Yeah." Marcus held Dominic's gaze, watching the calculations behind those cold gray eyes. "Funny how that happened. Someone jammed the basement exit shut right before pouring gasoline. If we hadn't found the old coal chute," he glanced at Ryan, who caught the lie and nodded, "we would have burned alive." The reporter's pen moved faster. The crowd murmured skeptical glances, shifting toward Dominic. The developer recovered quickly, smoothing his expression into something between relief and concern. "Thank God you're safe, Marcus. I was just telling the sheriff how worried I was. But look at the building. The damage." He gestured toward the hotel. The kitchen was a charred skeleton visible through blown-out windows. The siding was scorched black in spreading patterns from the point of origin. Several first-floor windows had shattered from the heat. Smoke still rose in thin streams from the wreckage. Inspector Graves emerged from behind a fire truck, clipboard in hand. His expression suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. "The fire originated in your kitchen, Mr. Chen. Accelerant used. This is now a crime scene. But regardless of cause, the structural damage is catastrophic. I'm issuing an immediate condemnation. You cannot remain in this building. Sheriff Coleman, you'll need to contact Child Protective Services. These children are homeless." Marcus felt the trap closing, the carefully orchestrated disaster achieving its purpose despite his survival. Dominic had won. Even if Marcus couldn't be killed, he could be displaced, his children taken the 90 days running out while he fought bureaucracy and legal battles he couldn't afford. Then he heard it. A sound that changed everything. From the basement vents, a rhythmic mechanical heartbeat pulsed through the morning air. Thump hiss. Thump hiss. The boiler still running despite the fire above maintaining its steady rhythm like the building's stubborn pulse refusing to quit. Inspector Graves frowned, cocking his head. "What is that?" Marcus felt something like joy cut through the exhaustion. "That is the boiler, Inspector. The heat you required. The fire didn't reach the mechanical room. Stone walls acted as a fire break. The kitchen burned, but the main structure is intact." He walked to the nearest vent, steam rising from the grate in clean white clouds. "According to your citation, I had 48 hours to get the heating system operational." "Well, listen, the heat is on." Graves consulted his clipboard, looking between the citation and the smoking building and the steam venting from below. His professional certainty wavered. The building is still fire-damaged, Mr. Chen. The kitchen is destroyed. The kitchen is damaged. Marcus kept his voice level, aware of the crowd listening, the reporter writing, Dominic watching with barely concealed fury. The main structure is stone and timber. 4 stories of Victorian construction built to last. It's still standing, Inspector. We have heat. We have water from the well system. We have electricity. Unless you want to arrest me for being the victim of arson, we're staying. Sheriff Coleman shifted his weight, glancing between Graves and Dominic. The calculation was visible on his face, which powerful man to appease, which side would cost him less. Then he looked at the children, at Lily, coughing into her bear, at Oliver's soot-stained face, at Maya trying to look brave while shaking with cold and fear, at Ryan standing protective beside his father. Something in Coleman's expression shifted some line he wouldn't cross. He's right, Graves. The sheriff's voice carried reluctant authority. If the heating system is operational and the main structure is stable, you can't evict them today under the grace period statute. Give them the time specified in your original citation. Dominic's mask slipped completely for one heartbeat. His face twisted with rage before he caught himself, smoothed it back to neutral. He stalked to his SUV without another word, movements tight with controlled fury. Before opening the door, he leaned close enough that only Marcus could hear. You're playing a game you can't win, Chen. This was mercy. Next time won't be. The SUV's engine roared to life. Dominic pulled out fast, spraying gravel, leaving Marcus standing in the driveway with his soot-covered children and a hotel that had survived arson but might not survive winter. The next week passed in a blur of exhausting labor. They boarded up the destroyed kitchen with plywood Rosa donated from her hardware store. They scrubbed smoke damage from the ballroom walls until their hands bled. They moved their sleeping arrangements to the second floor as far from the fire damage as possible, using mattresses Rosa's church members contributed along with blankets and canned food. The town was starting to take sides, Marcus realized. Not everyone supported Dominic's vision of luxury condos and golf courses. But the real work happened in secret in the hours after the children slept, when Marcus descended into the cavern and filled mason jars with water from the thermal spring. 3 jars wrapped carefully in bubble wrap, packed into a cardboard box that rode in the passenger seat of Rosa's borrowed pickup truck like precious cargo. Ryan found him preparing to leave the truck idling in the pre-dawn darkness. Where are you going? Marcus wore his only suit jacket, the one from the funeral, reading over a borrowed shirt. Boston. Kensington Analytical Laboratories. If Edgar's right about this water, we need proof, professional analysis, something that can stand up in court when Dominic comes back with lawyers. What do we do while you're gone? Marcus handed him a list of emergency numbers. Rosa's contact at the top. Keep the doors locked, all of them. Don't let anyone in. Not Graves, not Coleman, definitely not anyone connected to Ashford Development. If there's any trouble, call Rosa first. She's got connections in this town that run deeper than Dominic's money. Ryan took the list, his 17-year-old face trying to project confidence he didn't feel. We can handle it, Dad. Marcus pulled him into a brief embrace, surprised at how tall his son had grown when that had happened. I know you can. I'll be back by dark. The drive to Boston took 5 hours through November, rain the windshield wipers maintaining a rhythm that matched Marcus's anxiety. He'd spent the last of Rosa's advance payment on expedited testing, $120 that represented the final gamble. If the water was ordinary, if Edgar was wrong, if Vincent's obsession had been delusion masquerading as vision, then they were finished. The 90 days would expire with nothing to show but debt and a condemnation notice. Kensington Analytical Laboratories occupied the 3rd floor of a research complex near M1T, all glass and steel, and the antiseptic smell of science reducing the world to measurable components. Marcus sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, watching graduate students come and go, reading the same magazine article about renewable energy 17 times. His stomach growled, but he'd skipped lunch to save money for gas. Finally, a woman in a lab coat emerged, holding a clipboard, with the kind of attention that suggested confusion or concern, or both. Dr. Iris Thorne, according to her ID badge. Mid-40s, dark hair streaked with gray eyes that had spent decades evaluating data and making pronouncements that determined success or failure. Mr. Chen. Her voice carried an academic precision, each word chosen deliberately. Marcus stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. "That's me." "Doctor." Thorne gestured to a consultation room, closed the door behind them for privacy. She set the clipboard on the table between them, removed her glasses, and looked at Marcus with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Where did you say you obtained this water sample, well?" Marcus kept his voice neutral, wary of revealing too much. "On my property in Maine." The scientist replaced her glasses, consulted her notes. "Mr. Chen, I've been testing water for 20 years. Municipal supplies, private wells, bottled brands, mineral springs. I've analyzed samples from every continent." Her finger tapped the clipboard. "I have never seen a profile like this." Marcus stopped breathing. "The electrolyte balance is extraordinary." Dr. Thorne pulled out a detailed chemical analysis, pointing to columns of numbers that meant nothing to Marcus, but clearly meant everything to her. The pH is naturally alkaline at 8.2, ideal for human consumption. But it's the mineral content that's remarkable. The lithium concentration is high enough to have genuine mood-stabilizing properties, but low enough to be completely safe for long-term consumption. The magnesium levels could support bone health. The trace sulfur compounds have anti-inflammatory potential. This isn't just drinking water, Mr. Chen. This is pharmaceutical-grade natural mineral water. Her eyes met his across the table, and Marcus saw wonder there, the kind scientists probably tried to suppress but couldn't quite eliminate. If you have access to a sustainable source of this water, if you can prove provenance and maintain consistent quality, you're sitting on something extraordinary. Marcus forced his voice to remain steady. "What's it worth?" Dr. Thorne laughed, a sound of genuine amusement mixed with disbelief. "If you bottled this and marketed it properly as a luxury wellness brand, natural lithium thermal spring source, unique mineral profile, retail point could easily be $5 to $6 per 16-ounce bottle. The wellness water market is exploding right now. People pay premium prices for water that claims health benefits even when the science is dubious. But this," she tapped the analysis, "this actually has the chemistry to back up the marketing claims." She paused, running calculations Marcus couldn't follow. "If the aquifer is sustainable, if the flow rate can support commercial bottling, if you can secure exclusive rights and navigate the FDA regulations, the water rights alone are worth conservatively $200 million. Could be more if you develop the brand correctly." The room tilted. Marcus gripped the table edge, knuckles going white. 200 million. Edgar had been right. Vincent had been right. The inheritance was not the hotel. It was what lived beneath it, flowing from depths the ocean had carved when this land was still wilderness. Dr. Thorne slid the analysis across the table. "You should get this registered immediately. File for trademark protection on the source. Document the geological survey. And Mr. Chen," her expression turned serious, "if this water is as unique as these readings suggest, people are going to want it very badly. Protect your source." Marcus drove back to Seaport Cove in a daze, the analysis report on the passenger seat where the water samples had been. He was rich. Not someday rich, not potentially rich. Actually genuinely rich. The kind of wealth that could pay off the hotel's debts like pocket change, could give his children futures beyond survival, could transform not just his family but the entire town that had started to rally behind them. He just had to survive long enough to prove it. The roadblock appeared as he crossed the Seaport Cove town line, a massive construction excavator parked horizontally across Cliffside Drive. Two men in hard hats stood beside it, orange vests bright in the fading daylight. Warning signs and traffic cones created an official-looking barrier that screamed Dominic Ashford's fingerprints. Marcus slammed the brakes, jumped from the truck. "Move that thing. I need to get to my children." The larger of the two men spat tobacco juice into the gravel. "Roads closed. Emergency repairs." "Sinkhole." "There's no sinkhole." Marcus could see the lie in their faces, the rehearsed quality of the response. "I need to get up there. Now." The man shrugged with theatrical indifference. "Walk. But it's a steep climb. Couple miles up that goat path. Your choice." Marcus reached for his phone to call Ryan, reassure the children he was coming. No service. He looked toward the cell tower on the ridge. The lights that should indicate active transmission were dark. Scheduled maintenance, the signs would probably claim. Nothing to do with Dominic Ashford's money or influence or desperate need to keep Marcus isolated. Fear transformed into something cold and sharp. Marcus abandoned the truck and ran his dress shoes slipping on the rocky trail, the suit jacket tangling around his arms. The analysis report crinkled in his pocket with each stride, $200 million reduced to paper, while his children waited alone in a hotel that men wanted to steal. The climb was torture. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he pushed harder, driven by a father's instinct that something was profoundly wrong. When he finally crested the ridge, breathing in ragged gasps, he found the hotel's front door standing open like a wound. Marcus ran inside, his shout echoing through the lobby. Ryan Maya silence answered, the kind that had weight and texture. He sprinted through the ballroom, empty mattresses overturned. The kitchen, nothing. The second floor, every room vacant, their few possessions scattered like evidence of a struggle that had already ended. Panic seized him with ice-cold fingers. He ran back outside, scanning the property for any sign, any clue. That's when he saw it taped to the porch column with bureaucratic precision, a bright yellow notice that might as well have been a death sentence. Department of Child and Family Services. Emergency removal order. Reason: unsafe environment. Child abandonment. Location of minors, state custody. Augusta facility. Contact number for appeal. Marcus fell to his knees on the porch. The scream that tore from his throat was primal, a sound of grief and rage that echoed off the cliffs and was swallowed by the indifferent ocean. Dominic hadn't burned the hotel. He'd stolen the only reason for fighting to keep it. He'd waited until Marcus left town, then used the legal system to take what arson couldn't destroy. A hand touched his shoulder. Marcus looked up through tears to see Rosa standing there, her weathered face tight with fury. She held a shotgun in one hand, a phone in the other. "They took them an hour ago." Her voice shook with rage barely contained. "I tried to stop them, showed them the grace period, the working boiler, everything. But they had paperwork signed by a judge. Emergency order. Your absence constituted abandonment in an unsafe structure. I threatened to call my lawyer and Coleman said he'd arrest me for interfering." She paused, her next words clearly causing pain. "Dominic was with them, Marcus, sitting in his SUV watching the whole thing. When they drove away with your kids, he was smiling." Marcus stood slowly, his grief crystallizing into something harder than diamond, colder than the Atlantic. When people ask you why you fought, make them understand it's not about being a hero. It's about being too stubborn to let evil win because you were tired. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the laboratory analysis. The paper crinkled as he unfolded it, Doctor. Thorne's signature at the bottom certifying that Marcus Chen owned water worth $200 million. Dominic wanted to break him. Wanted Marcus to trade the deed for his children, to choose between his family and his inheritance, to prove that poverty always surrendered to power. But Dominic had miscalculated. He'd shown Marcus what he was capable of, and in doing so had removed the last restraint on what Marcus was willing to do in return. Rosa watched something change in Marcus's face. "Will you sign? Will you trade the hotel for the kids?" Marcus looked at the analysis, then at the hotel. "No, I'm going to bury him. He wants a small-town feud. I'm making it a national scandal. He thinks I'm beaten. I'm just getting started." How Rosa's voice carried doubt mixed with desperate hope. "They have the law. They have the judge. They have your children." Marcus turned to her, and his voice came out steady with the kind of certainty that only comes from having nothing left to lose. "Do you know anyone with a satellite truck? A YouTube channel? Anything with a camera and an audience?" Rosa's expression shifted, understanding dawning. "My nephew runs an urban exploration channel. 2 million subscribers. Kids with cameras breaking into abandoned buildings, that kind of thing. Call him." Marcus looked at the analysis in his hand, the proof that would change everything. "Tell him we found a secret prohibition tunnel under a condemned hotel. Tell him there's a story about corrupt developers and stolen children and water worth $200 million. Tell him whatever gets cameras here by dawn. Tomorrow morning I'm holding a press conference, not on the porch of a condemned building. in the lobby of what's about to become Sea Cliff Springs Resort, a cooperative owned by the people of Seaport Cove. That night, while Rosa made calls that would bring the media circus to their forgotten corner of Maine, Marcus worked in the basement like a man possessed. He descended into the cavern, hauled bucket after bucket of crystal-clear water up that rusty ladder until his shoulders screamed and his hands bled. He found vintage bottles in the hotel's bar, cleaned them with religious attention to detail, filled each one with thermal spring water that caught the light like liquid diamonds. In Vincent's office, buried under years of papers, he found an old label maker. The letters he printed were simple, direct: Seacliff, 1922. The Water of Life. Aquaviti Springs. Each bottle got a label applied with hands that shook from exhaustion and determination. By dawn, he had 50 bottles lined up on the lobby's reception desk. 50 pieces of evidence that the inheritance was real, that Vincent had been protecting something worth dying for, that Dominic Ashford's desperation made perfect sense once you understood what he was trying to steal. The convoy arrived with the sunrise. Not just Rosa's nephew with his camera crew, but actual news vans from Portland and Bangor, attracted by social media posts about the story that had exploded overnight. Corrupt developer, orphaned children, secret tunnel, billion-dollar water. The algorithm loved it. 2 million subscribers had become 5 million viewers, and the number kept climbing. Marcus stood on the porch wearing his suit, looking like a king surveying a kingdom he'd defended against impossible odds. Behind him, the hotel still bore fire damage, but in the morning light it looked less like a ruin and more like a fortress that had survived a siege. The black SUV tore up the gravel driveway, swerving around the parked news vans. Dominic exploded from the driver's seat, his careful control shattered by desperation. "Get these people off my land!" Marcus stepped to the porch railing, cameras swiveling to capture him. Every microphone in the crowd turned his direction. "It's not your land, Dominic, and it never will be." He held up one of the bottles, the morning sun turning the water inside into captured light. The footage would go viral within hours, the soot-stained father holding hope in a glass bottle backlit by an ocean that had been there before developers and would be there after. "Ladies and gentlemen." Marcus's voice carried across the crowd, steady and clear. "Mr. Ashford here tried to burn this hotel down with my family inside. He used the legal system to kidnap my children. He bribed city officials and threatened anyone who helped us. All for this." He cracked the seal on the bottle. The hiss was audible in the morning silence. "This isn't just water. This is a thermal spring with a unique mineral profile worth $200 million, confirmed by laboratory analysis from Kensington Analytical in Boston. It's been here since 1920, protected by my uncle, and Dominic Ashford will never own it." The crowd gasped. Cameras zoomed in on the bottle. The reporter from the local paper was recording on her phone while writing in her notebook simultaneously. "I'm forming a cooperative." Marcus's next words were the ones he'd practiced all night, the ones that would define everything that came after. "The Seacliff belongs to the people of this town. The water rights will be shared. Profits will rebuild Seaport Cove, the school, the harbor, the businesses Dominic Ashford has been systematically destroying to force a sale." He pointed the bottle at Dominic like a weapon loaded with truth. "But first, I want my children back. You have 1 hour, or I pour this water on the ground, and I tell every camera here exactly which bank accounts you used to bribe Inspector Graves, exactly how you arranged the fire, exactly how you manipulated child services with a judge you own. 1 hour, Dominic." Dominic looked at the cameras at the phones, recording every moment at the townspeople who'd started to gather at the edges of the crowd. He saw his carefully constructed narrative crumbling, saw the trap Marcus had built from nothing but desperation and truth. His hand shook as he reached for his phone. The words came out barely above a whisper, but the microphones caught them. "Bring them back. Now." The hour that followed would be dissected across social media platforms, analyzed in journalism classes, turned into a case study of how ordinary people could fight power when they made the battle public. The live streams reached millions. The hashtags trended. The story of Marcus Chen versus Dominic Ashford became the narrative people needed, proof that David could still beat Goliath if David was willing to put everything on the line. When the black sedan with tinted windows pulled into the driveway, Marcus stopped breathing. The rear door opened and Lily tumbled out first, clutching her one-eyed bear running toward him with tears streaming down her face. Then Oliver, Maya, Ryan, all of them exhausted and frightened, but whole, unbroken. Marcus vaulted the porch railing, landed hard enough to send pain shooting through his ankles, caught his children in an embrace that tried to encompass all the fear and relief and love that had no adequate words. He buried his face in their hair, inhaling the smell of cheap state facility soap and fierce sweat and the indefinable essence that was his family. His shoulders shook with sobs he couldn't control, didn't try to hide. Ryan's voice came out muffled against Marcus's shoulder. "You did it, Dad. You actually did it." Behind them, Sheriff Coleman stepped forward. He looked at the reunion, then at Dominic Ashford trying to slide back toward his SUV. The sheriff's voice carried new strength, the sound of a man who'd found his spine when it counted. "Dominic." The developer froze one hand on the SUV's door handle. Coleman's next words came slowly, each one chosen with the weight of a career-ending decision. "I have documentation here from the social worker. She states you personally directed the emergency pickup, provided the judge's signature, arranged transportation. That's not standard procedure for a third party with no legal standing. Combined with Mr. Chen's allegations about bribery and arson, I think you need to come with me." Dominic's mask cracked completely. "This is a misunderstanding, Coleman. I was trying to help those children." The handcuffs clicking around Dominic Ashford's wrists sounded like the closing of a book, the end of a chapter where wealth and power always won. The crowd erupted in cheers. Rosa pumped her shotgun in the air. The cameras captured everything. The corrupt developer's perp walked the father, clutching his rescued children, the bottle of $200 million water sitting on the porch railing, catching the morning sun. Dominic looked at Marcus one final time as Coleman guided him toward the police cruiser. The shock on his face was absolute, the incomprehension of a man who'd never lost before and couldn't understand the rules of a game where money wasn't the only currency that mattered. 1 year later, Seacliff Springs Hotel and Spa stood transformed. The Victorian structure gleamed white and copper, restored to glory that exceeded even its 1920s heyday. Luxury vehicles lined the driveway for the grand opening gala, parked beside work trucks belonging to townspeople who'd helped rebuild and now owned shares in the cooperative that Marcus had promised. The bottling facility ran 24 hours near the beach, state-of-the-art equipment filling bottles with water that had already achieved cult status in the wellness community. Seacliff, 1922, the water of life. $6 per 16-ounce bottle flying off shelves in Whole Foods and boutique markets from Boston to Seattle. First-year revenue projections $50 million divided among 300 cooperative members according to shares based on labor contributed and town residents' duration. Marcus stood on the balcony of the presidential suite, Uncle Vincent's former office now restored with period furniture and modern amenities. He wore a tuxedo that actually fit, tailored specifically for tonight. Below, guests mingled in the lobby where the "Get Out" graffiti remained under protective glass, a reminder that threats could be transformed into testimonials. Ryan appeared in the doorway, also in formal wear, looking uncomfortable but proud. Nervous Marcus smiled, the expression still feeling new after a year of not fearing the next disaster. "A little. It's a lot of people." Ryan crossed to stand beside him, both of them looking out at the Atlantic. "They're here for you, Dad, for what you did." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm heading to MIT next week. Engineering program. Full scholarship plus the cooperative's education grant." Marcus's throat tightened. He pulled his son into a brief embrace, still marveling at when Ryan had grown taller than him. "I'm proud of you. Your uncle would be too." Maya burst through the door, practically vibrating with excitement. She'd grown into her role managing the hotel's art gallery, curating shows from local artists and sharing profits according to the cooperative model. "Come on. They're waiting for your toast." Lily followed, no longer wheezing, her asthma controlled by clean ocean air and medical care that money could buy without hesitation. Oliver came last, clutching a portfolio of architectural drawings, expansion plans for the hotel he'd been working on with a firm in Portland. Marcus descended the grand staircase with his children, the restored chandelier casting prisms across walls that had once threatened to collapse. The crowd fell silent as he reached the lobby floor. He looked at the reception desk where Vincent's diary sat in a display case beside the pink eviction notice from Detroit artifacts of the journey that had brought them here. He raised a glass of Seacliff water. The crystal caught the light, the liquid inside clear as truth. To Uncle Vincent, who left us what looked like ruin and taught us how to build cathedrals from the rubble. Who knew that the greatest inheritances aren't what you're given, but what you're forced to discover in yourself to keep them? The crowd roared, "To Vincent!" Marcus took a sip. It tasted like victory, like vindication, like every morning he'd woken up in that freezing hotel and chosen to stay instead of run. But he also added, because the truth mattered more than comfort. And to this community who reminded me that wealth isn't what you own alone, but what you build together. In the following months, the transformation spread beyond Seacliff. The school got new equipment and higher teacher salaries. The harbor saw repairs that brought the fishing fleet back to profitability. Rose's Hardware expanded into the space next door. The cannery reopened under cooperative ownership, processing sustainable local catch. Property taxes dropped 40%. Young families moved in, reversing decades of decline. Marcus's daily routine settled into rhythms he'd never imagined during those Detroit basement nights. Morning walks on the beach, water quality reports reviewed with scientists on retainer. Cooperative board meetings where decisions were made by consensus. Dinner with children who no longer flinched at every unexpected expense. The legal proceedings against Dominic Ashford dragged through courts for months before he accepted a plea deal, 5 years federal prison for bribery, fraud, and misuse of the child welfare system. His development company dissolved its assets, sold to pay restitution. The golf course was never built. The luxury condos remained blueprints in a drawer somewhere. Marcus framed the laboratory analysis from Dr. Thorne and hung it in his office, a reminder that expertise and documentation could fight power when wielded correctly. He kept the torn check from Dominic in the same frame, the $20,000 bribe that had seemed so tempting when he had nothing, so pathetic now that he understood what he'd actually been offered to surrender. On quiet mornings, Marcus sometimes descended to the basement mechanical room, where the boiler still maintained its steady rhythm, that mechanical heartbeat that had saved them when it mattered most. He'd place his hand on the warm metal, feeling the vibration, remembering the night Ryan had swung the sledgehammer with everything he had, the moment when impossible became inevitable because surrender wasn't an option. The aquaviti hatch remained in the floor, though now it opened to a properly constructed stairway with safety railings and LED lighting. Tours ran twice daily, guides explaining the history of Cornelius Vance and Prohibition-era bootlegging and the geological anomaly that made the thermal spring unique. The cavern had been carefully preserved, the old bottling equipment restored as historical artifacts, while modern facilities handled actual production. Sometimes late at night, when the hotel guests slept and the staff had gone home, Marcus would stand in the lobby where he'd first seen that spray-painted warning, "Get out!" The words glowed under the protective glass red paint, still angry after all this time. But now they meant something different. Not a threat he should have heeded, but a challenge he'd been right to defy. Because the truth Marcus had learned, the inheritance Uncle Vincent had really left him, wasn't measured in dollars or mineral rights or Victorian architecture. It was simpler and more profound. Some things are worth standing your ground for, even when the ground is crumbling beneath your feet. Especially then. The moment you believe you're too poor, too beaten, too tired to fight is exactly when fighting matters most. His children would carry that knowledge forward. Ryan to MIT's engineering program, where he'd designed sustainable water systems for developing nations. Maya to art curation, with a focus on economic justice. Oliver to architecture that served communities rather than developers. Lily to whatever future her healthy lungs would allow. They'd learned that inheritance wasn't what you received, but what you refused to surrender. Marcus looked at his reflection in the glass covering that old threat. 43 years old now, no longer the broken mechanic from Detroit counting quarters for dinner, but still the same man who'd torn up a check rather than teach his children that everything had a price. The hotel stood solid around him, Victorian craftsmanship, married to modern systems, filled with guests and purpose, and the sound of honest work being rewarded fairly. Outside, the Atlantic continued its eternal rhythm against the cliffs. Below, the thermal spring bubbled with water that had been there before humans thought to bottle it, would be there long after the last bottle was sold. And Marcus Chen, who'd inherited what everyone called worthless, stood in the center of his rebuilt world and understood the water had never been the gold. The courage to protect it, the stubborn refusal to let it be stolen, the willingness to risk everything for what was right, that was the treasure Uncle Vincent had left him. That was the legacy that couldn't be seized or destroyed or bought at any price. He smiled, turned off the lobby lights, and climbed the stairs to where his children waited safe and whole and home.